Welcome, everyone. This is Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of People Solve Problems. Today, we have a special guest, Joan Tafoya. Joan, how you doing?
Great, good to be here.
Really glad to have you here. Joan is a retired technology leader and an optimistic technology leader that sees problems and opportunities. Developed that perspective over 38 years of experience at Intel, Sandia National Labs, and Meta. So fast-paced, working with lots of smart people, and fundamentally believes and implements that improvements and problem solving occurs through all the people in the organization, not just leaders and managers. I've got to see that in action as she's led walks the talk as she talks about shares some of her perspectives from those 38 years. So let's start with some some examples in history. I know coaching has always been important for you from a leadership standpoint. Do you have examples or scenarios of where coaching problem solving was it was difficult and challenging, and how'd you overcome that?
Well, first, Jamie, thanks for the introduction. And yes, I am pleased that you and I have had the chance to connect over each of those places that I worked in the many, many years of trying to learn and get better on this. Coaching is one of those things that I didn't appreciate at first how important it was. In my I'd call it my early engineer, early manager days. I was so focused on getting the job done and getting results and making sure things were just the best they could be that I often got frustrated when people weren't doing it the way I wanted them to do it or weren't doing it the way I would do it.
Right.
And only later did I realize that I'm not actually going to be able to advance until I teach others to maybe think differently, not
Mhm.
necessarily think like me, but think about problem solving. And I would say that happened first when I was in Intel, and I was running the manufacturing line in one of our state of the art fabs, and there was a lot to do. And if everybody kept coming to me to ask what's the next step, we weren't getting very far, and I felt myself burning out. I remember one of the courses you taught, Jamie, one of these week-long courses that's was a great resetting to remind me that not only do I have to be more overt um, on what I'm thinking, not just think it and then take action, but just like talk out loud so people can understand what I'm thinking, but then also ask people what they're thinking. If it's good enough, just let them go do it, and then we would just recover from there. So that's the first challenge that comes to mind that at least it was really my personal growth. I've got to move from always being the person people ask to being better at coaching.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I don't know if you can this particular question about that moment where you really took coaching seriously, brought it more central. Do you do you think that was more about you preserving and sustaining your leadership? So was it more not selfish, but more about your leadership and protecting it and leveraging it? Or is it more about the results and just sort of recognizing you thought you could get more by investing in coaching and using that as a lever?
Boy, that's a deep question. My first where my head goes to first is somewhat of a self-preservation, only because I was getting burnt out, trying to always be there for everyone. When they had a question, I would be there. But then as I went along, I realized that part of the challenge was we didn't all have the same view of what success looked like. So there might be a clear problem we were trying to solve, but if we were also looking for different ways to get to some future state, some success, we were actually going at odds with each other. And that's, I think, where the transition was for me is that if I want to go do something else, and of course, everybody I think in their career wants to go try that next opportunity or free yourself up for some other stretch assignments, you better have other people behind that you can trust and you feel like they will make good choices, even if they're not exactly the choices you would make. And so that's where I spent a little bit more time thinking about the coaching from a perspective of, are we aligned on the problem and are we aligned on the success and where we want to go? And then, and it served both purposes. I selfishly got people to be there and cover for me and actually take over themselves. They were growing, and I got to go do other things. So,
Yeah. And the audience you're coaching, let me ask about this because you have with those three companies, Intel, super smart people, Sandia National Labs. It's a question more of how many PhDs you have than than if you have
yes.
one. And then Meta, smart people moving really fast. Um, Being surrounded by sort of smart people that you're then trying to coach, did that make it, easier to trust them, harder to coach them? How did that play into your both decision to and ability to coach?
Well, that's you triggered a thought with Sandia National Laboratories. My role there was to build a new department that helped us look at lean practices and problem-solving practices differently. It was in the very early days of trying to become more efficient, which of course is the buzzword today in the government. And um, it was challenging for many reasons. One is that everybody had a PhD or more, right? They might have two PhDs, and they were all in super technical fields. It's the research and development laboratory for the government doing state of the art everything. And if you don't come in with that particular background, who are you? You don't have credibility walking into the room. The other challenge is they've been doing this pace. These are career super smart people, but they've been there for their entire career. It's not like they came there as just a job hop. And they're pretty entrenched in the way they do things. So one of the challenges on helping coach technical problem solving with folks like that was that credibility that you have to build. And by no means was I trying to pass myself off as some technologist with PhD equivalent to theirs, but you do have to bring in some new way of thinking. And one method that I actually ended up working for me is that you got pretty good at not only listening to these people and then returning what they said so they can appreciate that you comprehended their challenges, but then asking better questions like, okay, you have all this knowledge. What knowledge do you need now? Sometimes you put that as, what are your knowledge gaps
Mhm.
to make that next breakthrough? I remember this problem. We were trying to make lithium batteries better so that they can go in satellites longer. Anyway, it was a pretty complicated problem. I don't know much about that, but by an outside voice asking these problem questions that help them discover their knowledge gaps was a win-win for them and for me because they got introduced to a new way to solve problems.
Yeah,
So that's one way of doing it.
that's great. Um, Certainly sounds like it requires some patience, both them and you, in the process. But that's, I think, often part of
Yes.
coaching. Um, let's talk about prioritization a little bit. So, especially those organizations either have a lot to do or a lot to do fast. And so that means, you're lots of problems popping up left, right, and center. Um, how do you prioritize in that environment where the problems are hard, the problems are many, and the speed requirements are in high demand?
When I joined Meta, they were just in the process of transitioning from this culture of move fast and break things to, oh my gosh, we're pretty big now. We have a lot of folks depending on the products of Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. We can't break things anymore because that really impacts people. So let's move fast, but do it in a way with reliability, sustainability. And you can imagine that people were still they love the move fast to break things. So what I found often is um, there was a embedded reward system to make an impact. Well, an impact was measured very short term. Okay, did it fix this particular problem, which might be a band-aid or might not even be a real fix. You just were lucky enough to do something. So when since everybody swarms all the most visible problems, one of the first things I would ask on a prioritization of problems is this team, the team we're on, the one, are we best suited to solve that problem? Or is there a better team to do it? Because it doesn't really help when everybody swarms a problem, sort of like a kindergarten soccer team. You don't need everybody jumping on to that particular problem just because it has, Mark Zuckerberg's attention. Let's all decide, is this the best one to solve? So that's the first one. Are we best suited to solve it? Then I think about a couple other things. Uh, is that pain point or problem we're trying to solve really important for our larger organization? Try to like move yourself out of your circle and even out of your manager circle and a little bit broader and think, is this is this really a good problem to solve for many, not just because it's our pain point? Often we find ourselves something that's a pain for us is actually done in a way because another group might need us to do it that way for a reason we don't even understand. And then finally, if I can figure out how to solve some problems, as I was a manager, I always try to put a small percentage of my people in a place where they could solve problems that what I consider as quick wins. Not only does that help build positive morale for the team because you're getting something done, people appreciate, oh, look at that. They actually have a quick win. They've done something. They're not just sitting there admiring a problem. So
Mhm.
those are the things I think about is those quick wins and are we qualified? And is this really a bigger problem for others, not just us?
Yeah, it's a great rubric to be using. I have to say that, we don't hear often, are we best suited to solve the problem? Often it's just, is the problem important? And we're here, let's go solve it. And this sort of suggests a broader organizational view that we're part of, which should be a strength, and that requires moving some problems elsewhere. I do want to ask, just to follow up on quick wins. Um, being a part of that first level sort of filter, um, did quick wins have to go through its own filter of what worked or what didn't? Or because, as you stated, their own benefit, solving quick wins has its own benefit, and so just quick wins were quick wins, and it didn't matter what they were about.
Um, quick wins to me are something that can be done with few resources, so it doesn't drain something else. It doesn't necessarily have to be a permanent sustainable fix. It allows us to get a short-term fix in. If that's the case, though, I asked the team to, we always used some tool, a Kanban, a Jira, whatever, to put our problems in, to make sure it was in there if we think it's not going to happen. And you had some quick feedback that it solved somebody else's problem. So those are some of the filters of what quick win was. It didn't really have to do about um, a special rubric or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's talk about ideation. Again, you work with people with PhDs, and you work in an environment where it's, I move fast and break things. Yeah. So how do you approach, ideation for either yourself or for a team you're facilitating or responsible for or coaching?
One of the as my teams got larger and larger, one of my ahas, I think I really started this in Sandia as well, Sandia National Labs, is to start with the basics, which was what problem are we trying to solve? So ideation to me only starts with that question. What problem are we trying to solve? And when you do an exercise where everybody writes down their problem statement, we come in together with some big whatever title theme and start throwing ideas around. I think it's really important for folks to clarify their own thoughts first and make sure we're clear on their problem statement. So I always, well, not always, but very, very frequently when I bring people together, start with a silent exercise and said, just write down the problem statement that you think we're here to spend some time on. And then when we get together and everybody reads their statement in silence, right? So it's not, you don't have group think and you don't have people that are more introverted, not saying anything. You I've never been disappointed on the variety of answers, right? We all
Right.
find something different there. But once we settle on that, the next part again, we do a similar exercise on what would success look like if we solve this problem? Now that we've agreed to that, what does that look like? And these can happen at the same time, like the same workshop or different weeks. Again, I find that that's also quite different from person to person unless we get it all out there. So ideation to me really starts with those two activities. What problem are we trying to solve and what success is? I also like to prepare a before action review when I start big problems. So these wouldn't be the small things, but if there's a really big organizational challenge or technical challenge, I really like the before action review activity. I know a lot of folks have heard of after action reviews, but that just really helps people ground on like what questions we need, what do we know so far. And then I think the final part about ideation is um, I personally love to bring in contrarians. If you have a whole bunch of people that are just all getting along and they all see it the same way, then you're probably missing something. So
Right.
it's a little bit, for some people that's very uncomfortable, but a good debate brings some incredible ideas. So those are
Yeah.
some of my things I think about.
Well, let me ask about contrarians because I love to bring in contrarians, and heck, I like to be the contrarian in a lot of cases. Do you find that contrarians are more stimulus, meaning they kind of trigger other people to the ideation, or are they actually the source of the new idea that might move us along into success?
It's a little bit of both, I think. I'm some past events are running through my head. What what's come to mind is I guess I should start with when it didn't work, it's because I thought someone was like in another organization and they always were seeing things differently and always had 2 cents to throw in. But when they came into this exercise, they felt like the need to correct everyone
Yeah.
or the need to, well, you guys just don't see it the way I'm seeing it, so you must be wrong. So I think you get a little bit of both ideation from them as well as a little bit of edge. My You triggered a thought where the when it worked best, I had to have a conversation with a contrarian prior to the session to say, "This is what I need from you. This is how I need you to show up. I'm not asking you to hold back on any of your thoughts or ideas, but this is how I need you to show up." And then it worked best that way.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not to be a handbrake, right? So,
Right.
for the team. Um, so once you're past ideation, you need to sort of select solutions, and you've kind of already indicated, especially with quick wins. Sometimes, half solution is better than a full solution. You mentioned meta, where moving fast was the priority, but then not breaking things started to change.
Mhm.
Um, so how did you approach competing priorities? And I think along with that, how transparent and sort of crisp do those priorities need to be around solution selection?
I'm thinking about a meta again. So there were always competing priorities. After we have where we're headed, I personally like to see um, some time boundaries put in place. We have to make so much progress by such a time, and then do a quick check, a quick reflection activity. Okay, what did we learn in the last week, or what did we learn with that last trial exercise? One particular activity was we were seeing a failure with server racks that it was, you think we'd fix it and then it wasn't fixed. And we'd go in this cycle. And so it's like, let's slow down and figure out what we know and what we don't know. So how do I prioritize that? When you scope a problem and you find that you're learning so many new things that it's taking longer or you really don't understand a lot, I think that's the time I would sit and reprioritize because I either need more resources or more time, and that has to come from something else. And that's really when I start thinking about those other criteria of prioritization. Okay, can something that's be deprioritized so I can bring resources over and they deprioritize it because it's not as impactful to the to other problems. Those are some of the triggers I have on that.
Yeah.
And on that particular server problem, you ended up having to well, what we did, bring in other knowledge, other people that have might have some other ideas. And you, sometimes I have to admit, you feel like you're going back to the beginning, but that's problem solving for you.
Yeah. That's great. And so time and prioritization around time becomes a huge factor in that process.
Time and resources, and your resources knowledge too. I mean, you might feel like you have all the right people, but as you learn more, you realize there's some gaps. There's some gaps, and somebody hasn't seen that particular new situation, so they need
Yeah.
to bring in some others.
Let me ask you one last question. This is sort of just sort of some career advice. If you were talking to yourself or just a young engineer starting out in the world who wanted to go lead, uh, fast-paced, hard-charging, challenging environments, what would be your advice to that young engineer to prepare themselves to lead in that world?
I um I think we learn best in struggles. When we're struggling, when you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, when you're really trying to do something brand new to you or pushing others to do something brand new, it feels like a horrible struggle at the time. And I often was very not patient with myself during that time. I felt like I had to know everything and have the schedule figured out or have the whole plan organized. And when I look back, I feel like I've learned the most when I was in the midst of struggling, right? Some crisis at work or some crash course I felt like I was taking in a new technology so I could at least use the right words onto those PhDs or whatever. And I feel most satisfied about those struggling times because I could really see myself grow, as a step function. But during that time, it wasn't fun.
Right.
So give yourself grace and patience during that time, but push yourself to get out of your comfort zone.
Fantastic. Seek discomfort. I love it. Great advice. Joan, I thank you for sharing your experience and insights with me and with our audience.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.